Hello, hello, everyone, and thank you for coming back to another episode, another week, another month of OWASP Nova. I am joined by Brian Reed from NowSecure, who is going to go into a deep dive on the MASVS, so the Mobile Application Security Verification Standard. And I just want to take 1 second to raise a question to you all. So for all of you, we've been doing this through YouTube Live since COVID started, and we want to try and add in a little bit of variance. So maybe come up with a way to make this more interactive. So please reach out to me if you like the current setup. Some of the things that we're considering is shifting to a Zoom call, so that way it's going to be easier to interact with the speakers or whomever or us. We can also consider doing this thing called gather.town, which is kind of like a 2D adventure of sort of like a virtual experience of being in the same place at the same time. So it's kind of like a Second Life or a gaming format where you can talk to each other in like a conference area, but maybe before or after the calls. So those are just a couple of the ideas that we are experimenting with or considering. So please, if you have any experience in that or you want to tell us what you think, then please email us, owaspnova@gmail. I'm at ben.pick@owas.org. You can also try owaspnova@gmail.com. You can also just interact with us through the Meetup site itself. You send an email, myself, Abdullah, and Sean will all get that. So please let us know what you think. And without any further ado, I'm going to jump off. And Brian, please take it away. But also, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. So thank you.
Got it. All right. Well, Ben, thank you for the intro. Is everybody able? There we go. People can see me. Want to make sure. So if you see me looking around, I got 3 monitors. I'm sure a lot of you are on the land of the many monitors. So as I look to my right, that's where the stream yard is, and then in front of me is my content. So thanks for the chance to talk. I had the opportunity to talk to the Northern Virginia crowd years ago before a little thing called COVID got us all stuck at home. Like we all are tonight, I suspect, although some of us are starting to go back. So appreciate the opportunity to talk about how the OWASP Mobile project has been evolving. And also I'm going to talk briefly about something called CycloneDX, which is a new standard coming from OWASP as well, related to software bill of materials and SCA. And so with that, I'm going to get rolling into the storyline a little bit. And so I've been doing mobile since BlackBerry, so you can tell by my lack of hair and all my gray, I've been doing a lot of this for a long time. I had the opportunity to participate with a startup working with BlackBerry, and then BlackBerry and Good Technology and a bunch of other mobile companies. So I'm really kind of a mobile dude from a security perspective over the years. Before that, it was an application development, databases, middleware, and a bunch of other stuff. So so I have a good understanding of the mobile marketplace and mobile technology span. NowSecure, you may know us as Biometric or NowSecure. We were born when Android was born over a dozen years ago. We contribute financially to the OWASP Mobile project. We also contribute to the specs and some of the tooling that's available as well. If you're familiar with Frida and Radare as open source tools, our research teams have created and maintain those tools. And more recently, I'm going to finish with something called CycloneDX. And if you haven't, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of SolarWinds breach and heard about software bill of materials, labeling, and a bunch of other things coming from the White House executive order. And CycloneDX is a new working group around standardizing interoperability for SBOMs and SCA. It's pretty cool too. So we'll talk briefly about that at the tail end here for those folks who haven't had a chance to have a look at that. So when we think of mobile innovation, there's some really cool stuff that's been built. I had the opportunity, for example, to work with Boeing when they were doing mobile AR, augmented reality for their mechanics or their industrial people building planes. There's been some really cool stuff built over the year. There's a couple of these first for when we think about mobile innovation. But when we think about the biggest frustration, right, if you're on the security side, your biggest frustration is probably whatever frustrates your developers. And so really in the world of everyone trying to deliver apps quickly, it's about how does security take friction out and help the development teams and the business overall deliver those applications quickly that meet whatever security bar your organization requires. And we all kind of have been through that experience of either you get run over by engineering or you're viewed as the bad guy for blocking a release. And so what we're trying to do is help organizations really eliminate those barriers and take some friction out. And to a large extent, what drives everybody nuts on both the security and the development side is the unpredictable release blockers. And what we tend to find on a regular basis as we engage with our clients is the frustration is mutual and shared for a variety of different reasons. And so as we've been working through this, we started in mobile forensics and mobile testing, but what we actually realized is it's about secure mobile development. So how do we help security teams understand secure mobile development and help developers secure mobile development and help security teams work with developers to enable secure mobile development? Because we all know if they write 1,000 lines of code that's already secure, then your testing is fast. So the shift left or otherwise, whatever you're going to call it, we want to make sure that you don't have blockers. And so if you're part of a team, right, so whether you're working on the security side, development side, or security embedded in development, when we think about what's going to block your release, there's a lot of different things that could block a mobile release. If you're working in the web world, you probably own the website and the domain, which means your team or the DevOps team or whoever's responsible can post a build anytime. But Apple and Google have their own way of choosing the process and when to release things as well. And so some of the things we're seeing now that are blockers aren't just security or privacy issues or what have you. They're actually Apple and Google changing their licensing rules or requiring use of certain APIs in a certain way, or deprecating certain APIs and rejecting apps that use them, or requiring a certain build level. Right now, Google requires SDK 29 or higher, and lots of apps are getting blocked from going into app stores because they use older versions of the Android SDK. Now, there's lots of other reasons that releases can be delayed, but in the end, to a large extent, we're all in the speed world. So I joined NowSecure about 4 years ago. 2 years before that, we had started scanning App Store apps. And so we've got about 6 years worth of data scanning the millions and millions of apps in the public app stores. And some of you may work for companies that produce those apps that swim in the public app store. And we've been benchmarking that data, and about every year we publish an update. And it's kind of sad, but if you read anybody's benchmarks for any kind of security issues on the web world, cross-site scripting never seems to go away, even though we've known about it for more than a decade. 85% of mobile apps in the App Store have security vulnerabilities that fail one or more of the OWASP top 10. About 70% of them leak PII in a way that would or should violate GDPR or CCPA if there was some kind of certifying authority or a standard spec, kind of like OWASP Mobile Top 10 for that. And every year it's the same thing. And so part of our mission is to help organizations raise the bar on mobile AppSec. And there's lots of reasons why we're here. Some of it is ignorance of secure coding practices. Some of it is engineering running over security and just not having time to test. Some of it's lack of skills and tooling to figure out how to do the testing. Some of it's the race to release collides with the lack of tooling and skills. And there's a whole variety of reasons. But the reality is, if developers wrote more secure code, this number would go down. So a little fun today. Sometimes I'll ask this if we're on like a Zoom or a WebEx, raise your hand if you use any of these apps, right? And so when we think about life for ourselves and for business, we all live on mobile now, and mobile's a transaction platform for so many parts of our life. You may or may not recognize that half the apps on this screen have had a breach in the last 2 years. I think some of us may be aware that iMessage, for example, there was just an alert, an emergency patch from Apple with a new 0-day in it that had an NSO click thing in it. But the reality is even the best organizations have mobile breaches, and that goes back to the 85% of mobile apps in the App Store have vulnerabilities. And so what we want to do is give you some skills today to try to help you deal with that. So we have two resources that you might find interesting. So we actually have a mobile risk tracker. So this takes the top 5,000 most popular apps in the Apple App Store and Google Play and organizes them by vertical segment, and then analyzes on an anonymized basis security issues. So you can see here, for example, this is a gig economy bucket. It's got about 687 apps. We find that 100% of those apps have a security vulnerability that violates the OWASP top 10, 91% leak private data, and so on and so forth. So you might find that interesting. And if you're in a particular industry vertical, maybe you're in I don't know, media or telecommunications, Sean, or any other major vertical, you will find your data, banking, healthcare, or what have you. We're going to be adding some government benchmark data. We've got holiday shopping apps coming soon. We've got a lot of retailers in there already. So it's an interesting way to kind of get a perspective of what's going on. We also have a breach tracker. You're welcome to use that. That's kind of the ugly story of all the stuff that's been happening. And so as I work with organizations, what we tend to need to think about the characteristics. Most people I engage with understand web and are new to mobile. Some of you may have deeper mobile expertise. I'm expecting that most of you have light, if any, mobile expertise. And so as we start thinking about understanding mobile and the unique characteristics of what we're trying to do, we need to understand all the different moving parts that are involved here, right? And probably the biggest thing to recognize is that you've got these applications running in the wild on an untrustworthy device. You should assume that someone out there is reversing your app, like us, and our analysis of the App Store. And yes, we can get past Apple's DRM and a bunch of other things. And so we need to think about what's the right tactics for securing our apps and writing secure code and testing for secure code and obfuscating our code, but also understand how to test that code. And if I sound like I'm talking to developers, we have found that some of the best skills that our security analysts can learn is how to work with developers to help them write secure code in the first place. And that's where the OWASP Mobile Project comes in, because there's actually a set of documents that are good for both sides of the house. So if we think about this, when in understanding how to do mobile pen testing, we've got to understand the device, we've got to understand the apps, the operating system, how the device works, the network, the cloud services that it's going to be connecting to, and the back-end data center place that it's going to be connecting to as well. Now, for some organizations, they're already doing API and back-end security testing, which is great, because that means the right side of this picture is already taken care of. Maybe you have a testing program for the center and you need to deal with the left-hand side. And so we need to consider that a mobile app is really more than a mobile app. It's all the services it connects to as well. If we dive inside of that, right, there's code issues, data at rest issues, data in motion issues, runtime issues, API and back-end issues, and all kinds of bad attacks or hacks in here. We've been posting some variation of the mobile attack surface graphic for a lot of years to kind of help people understand the overall domain of what they need to care about and what we ultimately need to care about here. So reducing the attack surface basically means writing secure code on the app, managing data at rest, managing data in motion, and making sure you have a clean API backend. And so for us in the testing world, that means we need to test all of these things. And there's a mixture of tools and techniques we can use to do that. We're going to go through the OWASP guidelines here today in order to understand that. So it's interesting. Sometimes conversations get started with, well, should I be using SAST or DAST, or should I use Freedom Radare or Burp Suite, or what tools should I use? And a lot of this gets into just simply understanding the technology domain and then making sure you're using the best OWASP resources and other third-party resources to tackle it. And that's what we're going to share as we kind of run through this. So the OWASP Mobile Project really is the two documents in the middle, right? The OWASP Top 10 is where we all got started. The MASVS is where you need to go. And so we encourage all of you to download and have a look at the MASVS or jump into the Git repo. And then the MSTG is really the testing guide. Now, the difference between the MASVS and the MSTG, if you're not aware, is the MASVS is the guide. That is actually instructions for development and security teams on how to design and build secure mobile apps and strategies for testing them based on their threat model. The MSTG is the line by line with a giant spreadsheet of all the tests you might run. Now, when we think about OWASP, OWASP is a set of guidelines. It's not an actual certification regime. And so inside this, then you get from the testing guide, you have the list of what enumerated of what you should test, but you need to figure out what actually is relevant to you that you should bother to test. You also have to figure out how to test it. And that can be a bit of a challenge as well. If you printed out the MSTG, I believe it's something in the land of a couple hundred pages. I don't think it's made it to 1,000 pages yet. But what we want to think about is with the MASVS, if you have not read it and you are in or going into mobile pen testing, please read it. It is a worthwhile journey. The MSTG is what you can pull out to figure out how to build your test infrastructure and your testing strategy to go with it. So that's really your cookbook. So there's a set of fundamentals, and welcome to Threat Modeling 101. So MASVS really looks at mobile apps from a sort of 4-box model that I'll kind of talk through. So when we look at level 1, that's sort of the minimum security. Think about like a simple WebMD app where I can look up diseases or health conditions. And there's no compliance or regulatory needs. The app is super simple. Maybe you have something that looks up what's for lunch in the cafeteria or what have you. I'm going to do healthcare here. So we can think about like a simple WebMD kind of healthcare app here. This is basically minimum testing. Make sure that it meets some sort of okay level of standards of testing and secure development. Now, a level 2 might be an application that is simple, but has something, not simple, but it has critical data in it. So it might have regulated industry data. If you're in the banking, for example, you're definitely in this category for anything that has bank account information or transactions in it. So you need to think about client compliance. You need to think about IP. You need to think about tasks that might be performed in it. It's in a classic threat model sense. You'll see one of the levels of MASVS is threat modeling. Let's say a healthcare weight monitoring app. So we moved from WebMD, which is a general lookup, to actually I've got some PII and HIPAA protected or PHI protected data. So my healthcare weight monitoring app, I want to be careful with on that level. Now, R is really bringing in resilience, right? And more, we're all focusing on resilience in many different ways. And so as we think about L1 plus R, it's a simple app, but there's unique IP in it. Maybe there's something in my algorithms that I need to protect. And so like a medical formulary app would be an example of that, maybe for drug prescribing. And it might have some compound or complex IP in it that the organization wants to protect. And so I want to protect that malicious modification or theft. So I'm going to build resilience in as well. We'll talk a little bit about that in detail. And then finally, there's L2. So basically now I've got regulated data, I've got complex activities, I have PII, PHI, all that great stuff. I got compliance and everything else. And I need to make the app self-defending. That's where we get into something like a healthcare drug delivery app. So maybe you have an app that manipulates an insulin pump attached to your body, for example. That would be an L2 plus R. So the structure of MASVS and the structure of the MSTG is to say, identify through threat modeling what category within this model your application lives. And then based on that, here's the recipe or the cookbook of how you should build it, how you should test it. So we're going to take a look at that. So L1 expects standard security practices. L2 expects a much harder defense. So think about hardening against the lost device scenario. Think about cert pinning and multi-factor authentication and maybe some policy around risk and risk management of your data. When we get onto the right-hand side with resilience, now it's, hardening with device binding, obfuscation, possibly anti-tampering, things like that. And it's also important, you're going to hear me say this 3 or 4 times, and we get this more from developers and security teams. Anti-tampering and hardening an app does not protect you from security vulnerabilities. It just doesn't, right? We've had lots of apps that we tested, and then somebody ran through an ArcSan or some other obfuscation tool. We tested it again, and we still got the vulns. So anti-tampering does not really cover for much of anything on the vuln side. So when you open the book, you start working through the chapters. There are 8 domains. I've talked a bit about threat modeling and architecture and design. That's great for security and development teams and architects, application architects, to get together on and build your strategy. And then it's very logical. If you know the OWASP top 10, this will look kind of similar for a number of these. You got data storage, crypto, authentication, network communication, environmental interaction items, code quality, and resiliency, right? You'll notice the plus R really stresses resiliency. The OWASP top 10 didn't cover all of these, but we covered a number of them. And you might say, okay, well, so the book's a couple hundred pages long and the test list is a couple thousand lines long. How am I really going to tackle this? And so what I'm actually going to do is give you a guide to the MASVS and some training here that's based on vulnerabilities reverse engineered into what things should we focus on. Otherwise known as, we've taken those benchmarks and analyzed where the most frequent weaknesses are. And I'm going to show you where those are so you knew where to focus your development and your testing. So these are going to be the top 5 areas where we find vulnerabilities most often and most frequently, and some guidelines on how to both develop and test to protect your apps and your organizations from them. All right, so Data stored in an insecure location. Guess what? That is the most frequent vulnerability we find. Last benchmark run was 52% of 1 million apps in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store had data stored in an insecure location. 50% was last year's benchmark. I just ran some updates. I realized I didn't update all the slides with all the new data. So that's bad, right? Now, you might say, well, does someone have to have their hands on the device? I'm not worried about leaking data because maybe the bad guy has to have hands on device. Well, guess what? If he's got an app that can scrape data off the device, then he's going to get the data off the device. Depending on how you set your permissions and other things, it's still possible to remotely steal either from the device through a backup or using a third-party app a lot of data. So when we think about insecure location, that's really V2 and V3. It's a combination of data storage and privacy and proper crypto. So we find things like, using the file system without proper controls, and that allows malware or the lost device scenario or some of the crazy stuff we all try to defend against with like the USB charger activity. So plenty of impacts. Each slide here has links to the relevant sections of the Git repos for the Git docs for MASVS, V2 and V3. Each of the 5 sections I'm going through will also have links to the Apple and Google documentation, because we're trying to provide you with a resource you can use to go learn more of each area. So if you're building your test plan, it ought to be the worst thing they find most frequently is insecure storage. Let me make sure I know how to test for insecure storage. So classic development strategy items here. Let's make sure we don't write sensitive data to the device. Be smart about what you store. Make sure it's encrypted. The amount of unencrypted data is shocking. On the Android side, use scope storage. So a couple of years ago, Google team added Android scope storage as a much better way to manage storage on a device and protect data. Be careful of your query strings. Those are interceptable in a great way for the bad guys to find things. And from a testing perspective, then, each of these sections will have secure coding practices as well as testing. Test for credentials and PII, right? Test all over, everywhere for that. We find a lot of credential leakage. And what that leads to is things like credential stuffing that leads to, credential reuse. So bad guys can use it to get into something else. In a mobile app can be sitting in front, or a mobile app, you can swipe and move it to the background when you go to another app. Well, make sure that when your app goes into the background, that it is obfuscated and protected, and it's wiped from memory. That early on was commonplace for folks to steal data. Ideally, your app, when it moves into the background, your developers should code it so memory's wiped and the screen is wiped, and maybe you just give a white screen with a logo or something to protect that. Test the crypto. I'm going to dig into crypto a lot more later. We find a lot of crypto issues over everywhere. And in fact, from our pen testing services and our product portfolio, we've added a ton of crypto testing as we found more and more crypto weaknesses. Another smart move is to make sure the app itself requires a device passcode, right? If the device doesn't require a passcode, it makes it that much easier for a stolen person or a bad person to get in, right? That's not about the app's use of passwords. That's about the app requiring the device to have a password or not allow the app to run. It's good defense, especially for a resilient app. And I said check for the Android scope storage. Scope storage is relatively easy to test for from that perspective, whether you're using a SAS tool or a DAS tool. You can see it's in action or it's not. So that's our first and our worst. The next issue is network, right? Now, network does scare people more because network could be intercepted, redirected, phished, or otherwise. So we can have a look. So slightly smaller number, 48% of 1 million apps have insecure data communication. When you think about testing a mobile device, it can be a bit of work to get Burp Suite or something else configured properly to test properly. Network communication, certificate pinning, SSL is kind of a mess for a lot of organizations, whether they're using TrustKit or something else. And that's why they rely sometimes on third-party libraries to help with network security, and that leads to its own cast of characters. A large number of open source and third-party libraries by default use HTTP and lack TLS validations. So it may be that your team is writing code properly, but they may be interacting with third-party services or libraries that don't behave correctly. And so you need to look for things like that within the applications as well. Here's your OWASP links and your Apple and your Android links. So from a coding perspective, it's pretty straightforward. Only generate TLS sessions after you had your successful trust and a valid DNS name. There's lots of ways for people to bypass there. You want to test cert pinning and cert pinning bypass in a variety of configured modes, especially if you've got regulated data. Now, not every app has to use cert pinning. This goes back to am I an L1 versus an L2 app, and what's the threat model of my data? If your developers aren't familiar with cert pinning and complex network communications, work with them to identify a set of standard libraries they can use that do it properly. Make sure you threat model for each app project to make sure the developers are using it. And then you're basically just retesting code that everybody's already agreed and approved. On iOS and Android, the good news is that Apple and Google have, over the years, added a set of APIs. So on iOS, there's App Transport Security, or ATS. That's been in for 4 years almost now. And about 3 years ago, Android added network security configuration. By default, use those. By default, leave them on. So most, for both of these, the default for when you invoke the library is that ATS is on and network security configuration is on. We actually see people turning it off and then rolling their own, which kind of is mind-boggling. And then for developers, help them understand what a man-in-the-middle attack is so they have a better appreciation of it. So on your testing side, be testing for TLS cert pinning. Also be testing for zip files in transit. There's a lot of exploitable angles with zip files in transit and how they can get unpacked. A lot of applications will use zip files to upload information that either needs to be refreshed or they didn't want in the original binary they loaded into Apple and Google. And depending on how you build it, that can be intercepted and insert a malicious payload. So we've seen that in a number of attacks. Make sure that your SaaS tool or your manual testing, you find that ATS and NSC are turned on and they're actively being used. And then watch for your third-party libraries. As I said earlier, upwards of half the network issues we find are actually caused by third-party libraries and services. So again, your team might be doing the right thing, but the libraries they choose to use may not be doing the right thing. We don't want you to get in trouble there. That's a good argument for SCA. So third area that is fun to talk about is authentication and authorization. Now, I'm talking about this one because this is the opportunity halfway through at number 3 to cheer for the good news. So within the 8 V1 through V8 of MASVS, this is actually one of the better performing areas. We still find issues here. I'm going to give you some quick tips on it. But the good news is, by and large, authentication is done reasonably well, if not quite well, for most organizations. So there is a section of MASVS for this. V4 will walk you through authentication and session management. Often what we see are issues around password management, session management, or some other sort of authorization scheme. Again, this is a good area to work with your developers to have standardized libraries that they use, which makes it a lot easier, and talk to some common endpoints on the back end where at all possible. And that will give you a more secure environment to work with and more predictability in each time you're testing each future release. So a little bit of secure coding here. So make sure you terminate sessions. We find there are some who leave them open, and that's where over time gives the opportunity for something to happen bad in the background. Again, when a session is invalidated, make sure the data is gone. That is a frequent mistake from developers, and clearing memory, of course. So test your session validation, test data in memory, all these around the authentication cycle, right? From that perspective. Again, the good news is this is generally a more healthy area for developers and applications in terms of the quality of the testing we've seen. But it is important, right? Because credentials are the keys to everything. So we want to make sure people have authentication testing and coding best practices on their list, even though it seems to be going pretty well by and large through our benchmarking. Now, secure coding best practices or insecure coding best practices is kind of a big bucket of a lot of things. And what we find is, again, nearly half of the applications have extraneous functionality that is exploitable. And so that could come through either V6 on the environmental side or V7 on the code quality and build setting side. So we want to show you a couple things here to pay attention to as you work your way through it. So really what we're finding are logic flaws in vulnerable third-party libraries, right? Buffer overflows can still happen, memory leaks can still happen. But the logic flaws in the third-party libraries, again, are a common area where we find code quality issues, right? We all know the stories of using Stack Overflow to solve all your coding problems. Well, there's good stuff and there's bad stuff out there. Crypto is probably one of the primary areas you ought to focus. Are they using crypto the right way? Are they using SHA-3 or greater? Are they using key length? Are they resetting the keys? Are they generating dynamic keys, right? Are they using static versus dynamically generated keys and values, right? All of those things we find at a high frequency rate. Sometimes when we do training courses, we'll pull up some of the worst of the world. There was an app that we found that had 23 vulnerabilities and had actually managed to fire all 14 of our crypto findings. So that was our worst app that we ever found. So test the app with the valid cert, test for a debug build, test for hard-coded keys, right? Things of that nature. Test all the error conditions. A lot of error conditions we know aren't well developed, and therefore they're not well tested, and those also become attack vectors. We had a client who came in for pen testing, and it seems like no one in development knew what an error condition was or how to handle it. We found numerous vulnerabilities in their app because they weren't properly encoding error condition behavior and testing for it. And there were a whole other collection of derivative reasons that was happening. And I can't say it enough, check third-party libraries. So mobile, like other types of applications, are full of using third-party libraries, and there's lots of bad stuff out there that we find. So reverse engineering and anti-tampering. We have some of the world's best reversers. We have Ula and Pancake, for example, who wrote Frida and Radari. They're very popular reversing tools. And Frida and Radari, a lot of the tampering companies try to create anti-Frida Radari anti-tampering capabilities. And so what's great for these tools for pen testers and security researchers is you can get in there and really understand how the app runs, either in a positive way to do good or in a negative way to do bad. About a third of the apps are exposed. Yes, more of them are Android than iOS. Apple has built-in DRM from their perspective, but Android doesn't have much built into it, so you need to think about using a variety of tools in order to protect it. But what we do have is some APIs that we can use on both Apple and Google as well to help protect the binary and protect the IP. So Frida Radari and our two Frida repos are here. We've actually found some of our more advanced teams actually do exercises, Frida hacking exercises with some of their developers or their security champions in engineering to really help them understand what can be seen when an app is reversed. And that experience of seeing what a reversing tool can actually do to an app can dramatically impact and change the behavior of the developer and get them to realize why proper coding practices and anti-tampering and resiliency are so important for their projects. So there is, outside of the MASVS, you may or may not be aware, there is a reversing prevention project at OWASP, not just mobile specific, more generally. It's an interesting project to get involved in if you're looking to understand more about reversing, either building your skills or building resiliency against it. So there's a bonus in there for you. So on Android, we do suggest using third-party obfuscation tools. There are a number of them out there. The really advanced attacker or nation-state attacker will still work around them to some degree, but make it easy to protect your best stuff. Some of the best anti-tampering and reverse engineering is don't store the data, don't make the calls or process the algorithms on the local app. We were working with a retailer, and the retailer had actually in the mobile app put the IP for generating a coupon code in the mobile app. We reversed the mobile app quickly, figured out the algorithm, and we were able to generate new coupons for them. So that's a good reminder, and our team repeats that when we work with our clients, to be careful about what IP you put in the app. Assume whatever IP is in the app will get reversed, which means assume the bad guys will figure it out. Do as much as possible on the server side. Protect your most sensitive crown jewels and most sensitive IP on the server side. The developer might say, yeah, but I want the offline use, or I want the ease of use, and I don't want to have network dependencies and latencies and all the rest. And it's like, you need to accommodate that tax, because what you really want to do is make sure that that IP doesn't get out. Again, most mobile software engineers don't understand what's reversible in a mobile app. And so a little reversing exercise with them will help them understand. And then together you can jointly make sure you have the right application architecture and data flow and logic flow in order to resist it. Android, to help accommodate the lack of built-in DRM, did create the Safety Net API. The Safety Net API checks for tampering on the Android device and will allow an app to unload or not operate or function in certain ways if the device has been tampered, such as a rooted device or other things of that nature. So the more regulated you are, the more likely your app is an L2+R. You might want to use Safety Net and check for tampering and actually unload or not log in or what have you, your mobile app, to help protect yourself. And so when you think about testing, well, test for reversibility, right? Use commercial tooling or FreeRadar and see if you can reverse the app. That way you can see what's going on. Does the app detect a jailbreak or a root? It really should, and it should behave a certain way. Does the app detect a debugger is on and protect itself? Is the app resilient and protect itself from data or file manipulation in memory or on device or in transport? So think about that. Watch for the string tables. And again, from a static perspective, you can look for the Safety Net API. Has it been properly invoked or not? And so there's a bit around reversing. So, and I said it earlier, and I'll say it again because we wind up repeating this an incredible number of times, that anti-tampering doesn't fix security bugs, right? So the more secure the app, the better. Then you can layer the tampering in it, but don't let this happen. Now, we wind up needing to preach this more to the development side than the security analyst side, but wanted to get that out there for all of you to think about. And if you're going to use this content with your development team, then here's a good reason that third party's saying the same thing as you're trying to convince them of when it comes to tampering. So a couple takeaways, right? So again, assuming many of you have web experience and may or may not have deep mobile experience, recognize that they really are different. The OWASP Mobile Project's your friend. We have a really good community. There are a lot of good, Sven and Carlos have done a great job leading it and continue to do so. If you attended the OWASP 20th and got up at 4 a.m. East Coast time like I did, you could have heard the updates on the OWASP Mobile Project. There's some new things going on with the MSTG now. We're looking at it. The MASVS is pretty much in a good place. So there's a forklift activity going on around MSTG. From that perspective. Some of the other things we're looking to do is to deal with OS version updates and some things like that as Apple and Google continue to move the needle. So take advantage of the project, build the resources, build your toolkit, understand the platforms, take the time to learn threat modeling. You may or may not have deep threat modeling background if you're coming from web or network, but you really ought to understand threat modeling. The MASVS will teach you a lot about threat modeling. There's other courses out there. And the nice thing about the way the MASVS is structured, it really does break down the problem. What I showed you here are kind of the 5 areas we find, or rather 4 areas we find the most common vulnerabilities: storage, network, code, and reverse engineering. Of course, auth I actually showed you was good. Just make sure you got proper crypto and network communication around your auth. And please sign up and get involved. We really would encourage you to do so. You'll find our folks there and others. So there's some takeaways. So that's kind of the end of the main MASVS stuff. I have a bunch of reference resources I'm going to give you so you can go off for more learning. I'm happy to try to work on some Q&A here as well. But I want to share a little bit about SBOM and CycloneDX. So CycloneDX is a new flagship project at OWASP. The CycloneDX group was independent of OWASP, has been working a little over a year on creating a software bill of materials standard for interoperability. If if you're not familiar with software bill of materials or SBOMs, they are now becoming a critical component of software delivery. So the White House Cybersecurity Executive Order has mandated that CISA and the General Services Administration require all software purchased and used by the federal government must include a software bill of materials. Now, if you've been following the EOS saga, like a lot of other government, it's a quasi-regulation that needs to be written into standards. But SBOMs are here to stay. We're actually finding a number of our more advanced clients are requiring SBOMs as part of acceptance testing or acceptance in a purchase cycle. And so software bill of materials can be generated statically from source code, can be generated dynamically by running an app, which is the way we do it, in a variety of other ways. The great thing about CycloneDX is it's actually brought standardization to the SBOM format to drive interoperability. There's a lot of great folks involved in this. Steve Springett has kind of been the spiritual leader coming from ServiceNow. And if you're familiar with ServiceNow, they're all about interoperability of all kinds of stuff in their platforms. And the team at the OWASP 20th a couple weeks ago actually launched a free tool called the Dependency Tracker. So if you're starting to experiment with SBOMs, it's a really cool visualization tool that allows you to merge and analyze multiple SBOMs. For a mobile app, for example, you might have an SBOM that represents the mobile side. You might have an SBOM that represents a client, a set of cloud services. You might have an SBOM, one or more, that represents a set of backend APIs. Well, with the dependency track, you can actually merge all those SBOMs together to get a coordinated view of those. It also helps you analyze over time and look for patterns and a bunch of other stuff. It's a great open source project related to SBOM as well. So have provided the link here to the OWASP CycloneDX project, as well as the dependency track org that has the tooling with it. It's pretty cool. We do encourage all security and development teams to become familiar with software bill of materials. I think a lot of us for a while have been screaming about, the software supply chain. And, the SBOM is a piece of the software supply chain and a core component of understanding things. We're also finding more and more internal governance for regulated organizations outside of federal are also doing paying attention to SBOMs as well and mandating them either internally or from their suppliers. So if you're playing around with mobile apps and you want to get an SBOM, we've got a free SBOM generator. So for mobile, not web. So if you jump to this bit.ly, you can pick an app in the App Store and we'll generate an SBOM and send it to you over email. So most of the apps in the App Store we can scan, most of those apps we can generate. So if you happen to be working for a company like, I don't know, Verizon or something, you could go upload your Verizon app and get an answer back. And what we're trying to do is help people kind of understand and socialize CycloneDX and SBOMs and all that good stuff. So you'll see a little fakey app here of what you can get when you go do that. So as you look to build out your skill sets, have a look at SBOM land and think about the software bill of materials may eventually become a requirement that your providers that are using libraries or applications that you're going to use will have to provide to you as part of the business exchange. And this is a great way for all of us to get a better handle on what really are the ingredients inside our apps, mobile web or otherwise. The SBOM specs here around CycloneDX focus on things like versions, latest versions, licensing, sourcing, a bunch of other things. Big brother of SBOM is full-blown SCA. So basically you take an SBOM and you map it to CVEs and you've got SCA. Which some of you may have deployed SCA technology in your org, but clearly third-party libraries, as we've seen from our own vulnerability patterns in mobile, are wide scale, and so we're taking the SBOM and expanding it into SCA from a mobile perspective as well. Stay tuned on that one. So I said I would give some resources, and again, I'm happy to take questions at the end here. So if you're going to do it, here's what we recommend. So for your kit, go to the MASVS repo, go to the MSTG repo, go play in the hacking playground for the MSTG, and then take a look at if you're going to go the advanced mode, then pull down Frida and Radare. Links to the repos are there. You'll probably want a network testing tool as well. Again, remember I said that about half of it is insecure storage, which you can learn from Frida. About half of it is insecure networks. So you need burp or Zed or something to look at your network code. And you're going to want jailbroken and rooted devices. You have to be able to use all these tools. You have to be able to bypass the OS level security in order to actually do your testing. And good luck learning how to jailbreak and root. Rooting's pretty easy. Jailbreaking's getting a little harder, but Cydia is keeping up with it. If you're looking for more automated resources, so you want to move from build your own to buy something, there's free SBOM and free analysis reports here that you can get. And then we do have some commercial tools if you're interested in those to help you address your testing and development issues as well. Free training. So you're here because you want to learn. So NowSecure a few weeks ago launched something called NowSecure Academy, academy.nowsecure.com. NowSecure Academy is free online training. So in there's about a dozen courses, everything from HackerOne Playground to the core things to know about mobile AppSec to how to use the MASVS and how to use the MSTG and all kinds of stuff. We do have a mobile pen testing certification program that's coming later this year or early next year. We also already have deployed and have a number of customers who have done the developer certification. So there's about a 3-hour course that your developers can go through to learn how to write secure code, including some practicing. And we found a giant improvement in those ROI of those organizations where the developers have actually committed to taking the 3-hour course in improving their skills. So academy.nowsecure.com, great free courseware for you. If you want some deeper dive in a really deep 2-hour tearing apart mobile apps, along with how to use Frida and Rodari course, our NowSecure Connect conference is coming in November, and there's a bunch of deep dive training. It's all free. You can sign up for it. No, we're not going to spam you with marketing. What we're trying to do is raise everybody's skill set. There's a lot of cool things that will be going on through the 2-day event. It is all virtual, so you can ride the seat from wherever you are. We are recording it. The recordings and all the assets will be made available to people who sign up as well. Encourage you to sign up for Connect, and we're going to have a little fun too. So Connect is our annual sort of training event. So there was a question in here about posting. Yes, we will be sharing this deck as soon as I'm done, and I'm guessing this is being recorded for a live stream as well. I guess I mentioned this already before. You got the free SBOM. If you actually want a free analysis, so we basically have packaged about 80% of what our pen testers do into a free analysis program. So you could submit an app, and we'll walk you through a report. You'll see here one of my favorite demo apps. It's called CoronaFacts. We find all kinds of stuff. So like, how about leaking a password and an email address unencrypted over the air? Remember I talked about network issues? Notice the using HTTP exposing network data. That's pretty bad. Oh, and cookie issues, just like web apps. Yeah, they live in mobile apps. Remember I said before about disabling the native security as something some apps do when they load? Unbelievable here that both ATS protections on iOS are actually deactivated at load time of the app. Like, to me, it's like mind-boggling. Why would the developer do that? Also finds things like, third-party keyboards that might be malicious and so on and so forth. So this one found a bad library. So there's an insecure library for processing biometrics, and actually had API authentication issues when we fuzzed the back end. Life is fun. So you can get one of these suckers for free, just to give you a sense of maybe an app you're working on, see what it looks like, give you some perspectives of where to go and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not showing you the secret sauce behind this, but you'll also get code remediation instructions and evidence and all that other stuff. There's a lot of detail behind this one screen. Our typical mobile report can be anywhere from 30 to 100 pages. The good news is it's not thousands of pages. The better news is we have a less than 1% false positive rate. So it's not like looking at a SAST train wreck of inaccuracy. It's just pinpointing real issues that we find. Every vulnerability that's found in this test run actually has a mini POC with it, which is cool when you go back to the developers. If you're building it, this is a bunch of content, right? So we have a crib sheet to the OWASP guide. So here's the crib sheet. It's a shorter version of the big MSTG and the big MASVS. It's a good learning tool. It's actually really great to also help your developers or your managers get started and understand why you need to invest in OWASP in the mobile project. Some of the gory details around the top 5 I showed you are available there. We do have a full-blown 100-page how to set up a mobile security program. And one of the fun things that popped out of our Droidcon last year was a Crack Me for Android. So if you want to practice, there's a great Android Crack Me from the R2 team. That's the R2 Frida group. That's also available through OWASP as well. So lots more fun if you want to dive in and break things. Forget the commercial. So happy to take more questions. I see some chats there. I haven't seen a question, but I'm happy to take any now. Appreciate everybody's time today and participating and listening along. I try to pack a lot in, so you will get the deck, and every slide has links to more resources. So we encourage you to take advantage of any and all of those.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a question right there. So what's your experience with the security of mobile apps that were developed using cross-platform development frameworks? So Xamarin.
Xamarin and things like that. There is cross-platform frameworks and there's low-code, no-code. And I'm going to separate those two. I did an analysis of the low-code, no-code tools, App Annie and guys like that a few years ago. The low-code, no-code tools were a little worrisome. Some were better than others, depending on how the low-code, no-code tools work. Some of them generate lots of new code, and some of them are using common libraries. And so you might see everything from on iOS it's secure, and Android it's not, and vice versa. So those guys are a real mixed bag, and you'll want to test them. The cross-platform frameworks work pretty well. So we do find things, but they work pretty well. The area where you need to look at the cross-platform frameworks is thinking about IP protection and resiliency. So from that perspective, if you're using the framework and you're on Android and you have an L2R where you want a highly protected IP, will that cross-platform framework generate an app that you can in turn insert anti-tampering in? So I think most of them do that, but that's one area of consideration there. The benefit of a Xamarin or the other cross-platform tools, right, is the developer productivity side. And so the big thing to realize is that whether it's a cross-platform tool or not, it's going to run as a native app on the device. So don't assume that the cross-platform tools are fully secure, even though they'll all claim the code they generate is secure. Like the code your developers write, you still need to test it. We call it trust but verify.
Cool. So one question that I had was, what kinds of struggles have you experienced when an app or company is growing from MASVS level 1 to level 2? Is it something where you just kind of big bang it and you just know you need to start off with level 2, so you just kind of throw everything at the wall, or how do you?
That's a good question.
Progress?
Yeah, I think when you read the V1 chapter in the MASVS, it really talks about threat modeling, and it's got some matrices and flow diagrams to walk you through the threat model and decide, how do I really decide, is this an L1 or an L2, right? As well as the resiliency side, and then go from there, right? So I often use like the healthcare apps or certain kinds of financial apps as examples to help people kind of visualize what's there. The biggest thing about the difference between L1 and L2 is, do you have IP that is unique IP that you're worried that someone could steal or misuse, like the coupon example I had earlier? And what are you doing with transactional information that might be high risk or regulated? So if you're in a highly regulated category, odds are almost everything you write and test is going to be L2. Now, we work with financial institutions that have L1 and L2 apps. So one of them, for example, I used the example of the lunchroom. What's for food in the lunchroom, or what's available for parking spots in the building? There's nothing that really has to be protected in that, so you can treat it as an L1. But if you've got industry regulated data in banking, in retail, in customer service, whatever that is, then you need to make sure that you're probably recognizing that as L2 and or, frankly.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't see anything in the chat, so I guess we can just start closing down. Obviously, if you do have any questions, let me bring this back up. Sorry. If you do have any questions, I'm assuming they can feel free to email you or add you on Twitter or anything like that. Correct?
Yeah. Those are there, and like I said, if you want to meet the stars behind all of what we do, a lot of them will be at Connect Live and available. So Ula and Pancake, who have Frida and Radari, most of our pen testing team will be online doing training and answering questions. So that's your chance to kind of dive in even deeper if you want. And we're happy to talk offline as well.
Sounds great. So I don't see any other questions, so I'm just going to start closing it down. I really do want to thank you, Brian. This was a really, it was a great talk to go through and to help somebody who is trying to get back into the mobile AppSec world. So without any further ado, we're going to just start closing down. We will have another meetup in November. We are planning to try and go through the OWASP top 10. So keep following the meetup group, and we'll post more information as we have a date set for that. So stay tuned. And I hope you all have a great night. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe.
See you, everybody.
Take care.